Hi, I'm Matt Pavlic.
And I'm Jacob Kory.
And today, we're going to talk Bug Delver.
Sounds good. Let's dive in. Let's delve in.
Wow.
I need a deck, Matt. It's been a while since I've played Magic.
It has been.
What do you suggest?
You're a filthy liar, and you say you're going to show up to events, and then you don't, and then you're like, oh, I have real life, and I'm like, no, you don't. It's tough to be you.
It is. These days, I'd rather hit the gym, but, I make some time. So, yeah, I haven't played competitive tournament Magic in a couple of weeks now, so I'm feeling a little rusty. Plus, I want to get to try some of the new cards.
Yeah, all those new cards that have affected the metagame, and But let's get to talking about them though, and the decks, and don't want to waste any time here.
So So I've decided that I kind of want to play a black, blue, green deck, using Underground Seas, Bayous, and Tropical Lands. Maybe Wastelands, and we'll get to that. Maybe Delver of Secrets, maybe Stifles, maybe Hymn to Tourach, all the good fun cards, right? I'm not sure if maybe I even want to go Shardless and play Over the Top Control. I'm not sure if I want to play Dig Through Time and play good card advantage.
Yeah.
Maybe even throw in a Liliana or, Jace Beleren, the 3-drop place to just draw a card.
Stop.
No. Okay. Well, this is what I want to explore, right? So
let's kind of,
Matt, you being a master of Sylvan Library decks, guide me.
Well, I think we first have to look at what you expect the metagame to be like and what it actually looks like now. Now, I've touted Miracles to be the best deck, or on paper seems to be the best deck, assuming skill and practice are.
Yeah, it seems like objectively the most powerful or consistently powerful strategy you could do, which is put thumb screws on your opponent and tighten very, very, very much.
It seems like Bug is coming back in a big way. Well, Hymn to Tourach is good. People want to play their Hymn to Tourachs again, and the deck is quite powerful as well. So let's go over the Bug deck that has been coming back and kind of work out the different varieties of Bug and what you might want to be playing. What do you think?
Excellent. I like it. Also, let's build me a deck because, I'm a lazy sap and I need some ideas.
That's fair. You are a lazy sap. I want to talk about Bug Delver first, personally. What do you think about that?
I'm usually okay with Delver. But let's dive in.
So let's kind of break down the Delver deck and kind of talk about what it's doing. So, Team America, Bug Delver. How many creatures does it play?
Let's see. As a Delver deck, I think you have a lot of constraints. So generally you want about a little less than half your deck to be instants and sorceries, so it can actually cause the Delver to flip. So we're looking at maybe like 32 on the high end, maybe 25, 26 on the low end of sorceries and instants. I think maybe the question of how many creatures to play is the last thing you answer. The first thing is obviously the instants and sorceries.
No, I disagree. I disagree. Really? With this deck, you need this core of creatures. Otherwise, it's not. I don't feel it plays the same way. You need Delver of Secrets, you need Deathrite Shaman, and you need Tarmogoyf. Those, I think, are the three sets of core creatures, at least now, that you need to be dealing with.
Okay.
So, I think if people are like walking into a matchup and they can kind of either they see something or they see their opponent making certain plays, and they think it's Bug Delver, you should expect Delver of Secrets, Deathrite Shaman, Tarmogoyf, and...
Oh, right. Okay, yeah, I see what you're going. So this is more of like, I sit down and I'm playing against Underground Seas, Bayous, Tropical Lands, and I see a Delver of Secrets also.
Yeah.
I could probably pinpoint 50 to 55 cards in your deck right away.
And that's kind of what I want to go over.
Sure.
So of this, you can expect, like I said, Delver, Deathrite, Tarmogoyf. Maybe you will see a Tasigur, a Tombstalker. So, moving on from the...
So I think we established, like, what?
The creature base. 13
to 14 creatures,
yeah,
right?
Between 12 and 14.
Okay. So we're saying between 0 and 2 Tasigurs. I think maybe, for my experiment next week, I'll try 1 Tasigur.
Yeah. I have another card to split with Tasigur that we'll talk about in just a few minutes.
Okay. So do we want to go first to the spells and then come back to kind of the fun slots?
Yeah, let's go to the meat and potatoes, and then we'll go to the gravy.
All right. So the appetizer has been set in.
Now we're serving.
Bring on the next course.
Now, okay. So prime rib. This is the good stuff right here.
Hold on, let me get my steak sauce. Into the spells. What do we need? I'm going to be a real bold gentleman here and claim we're going to need 4 Brainstorms.
Oof, are you sure?
I think I could save a justification for 3, but, let's not break any banks here. Let's go to 4.
So, again, we're in a Delver shell, listeners. 4/4/4. 4 Ponder, 4 Brainstorm, 4 Force of Will. That's what you should be expecting to see. There could be subtle variations in Ponders or Force of Wills because of money, metagame constraints, etc. But generally 4/4/4. Okay?
I actually think if we're going into a metagame that we expect a lot of mid-range or creature decks, I could potentially see cutting one of the Force of Wills to the sideboard.
Sure, yeah, that does happen.
3 main deck, 1 sideboard.
And that happens more in the Shardless Bug, which we'll talk about after. But I think in the Delver strategy, because you're trying to land a threat and pressure with that one threat as far as that threat will go.
And protect the threat in case of cheap
Exactly.
removal.
So I think Force of Will is still where you want to be in this variety. Now, Bob Huang, a.k.a. Akatsuki, who is also streaming now, which you should check him out. We'll get the link up after. He's playing this deck, and I'm pretty sure he's the expert.
He was a big proponent of this deck about 6 months ago.
Yeah, pre-Treasure Cruise.
Right. Yeah, prior to Khans of Tarkir.
Yeah, and I still think the deck is quite good now. So, anyway, back to 4/4/4. 4 Brainstorm, 4 Force of Will, 4 Ponder. You're in bug colors, so you get to run my favorite removal, Abrupt Decay. And you should run how many of them?
I'm thinking 4 might be a little too much.
Nope,
3?
4.
4.
Nope, just
okay.
run 4. I think in this deck you just want to be
4.
super consistent. 4/4/4/4, 4 Abrupt Decay, and then I think this is where you can start getting into this is where we start to see what are we actually going to put on our potatoes here. We're going to put on chives.
Okay, so let's kind of just recap real quick. So we got 16 spells, and we've got at minimum 12 creatures, maybe 13. We'll call it 12 to 13.
Yeah.
Now we don't even have half a deck.
Not yet.
Okay. We need some more substance here.
Your Delver deck, you want Daze.
Ooh, okay. I like that. Now I think this is where you can get really creative. If you want to get creative, if you want consistency, you probably want 4.
If you want openness for having something like, say, Spell Pierce or something else, then you run 3.
Right. And I kind of like that idea because I do like running more counter heavy. Los Angeles, for instance, is pretty popular for combo. And I like to throw a little bit of curve. So let's for this deck run 3 Daze and 2 Spell Pierce.
I like that. I mean, especially if you're expecting miracles. I think there are times when Daze, a good miracles player can really play around Daze. It's very easy. You just make your land drops and do what you need to do. You play around the Daze, and then you land backbreakers like Counterbalance. Now, I think it is much more difficult for the miracles player to sit there until turn 4 to cast a Counterbalance around a Spell Pierce. You're absolutely slowing down their game while you're pressuring them. And I think if you can push them off with Spell Pierces as well, it will really screw them over, and that's where you want to be. Just cause them to stumble, and then you take advantage of that.
Excellent. Well, I mean, you essentially break up their tempo, and by doing so, you gain extra opportunities to continue attacking with Delver of Secrets, continue draining or squeezing their resources with Wasteland and Deathrite Shaman.
Exactly. So now, I think there's another big debate in this deck. How many lands do you play? And
I'm thinking.
And the 2 debates, we'll talk about them in order. So we'll talk about lands and then. And Hymn to Tourach versus Stifle.
Or even Thoughtseize.
Or Thoughtseize. So
yeah, I think it's kind of a 3-way path with what kind of non-counterspell disruption we're running.
I agree. So lands. Generally, you could run what I call the tempo build. So you run 3 of one blue duel, 3 of the other blue duel, 8 fetches, 4 wastelands. But you don't run any bridge duels. Now, there's some arguments to what this actually means and how we do it. So in Rug Delver, if you guys remember, it's 3 Volk, 3 Trop. There's no Taiga in the deck. In a lot of bug builds that are running Hymn to Tourach, you need double black quite often for not only Hymn to Tourach, but Liliana, whatever. So you will run Bayous. You actually run more Bayous. You'll run 2 Bayou, 4 Underground Sea, and the Trop. So the ratios are a little different.
I think the Tropical End's generally going to be the weakest in the bug deck because it doesn't deploy your heavy-hitting Disruption or Deathrite Shaman. So
Trop.
Thoughtseize and Deathrite...
Oh, it doesn't activate Deathrite Shaman. Yeah, okay. I thought you were saying deploy it, and I'm like,
Well, yeah, I'm thinking more of the activation on the black
Yeah.
side of Deathrite Shaman, which really is the one that wins the games. The green one just keeps you alive, hopefully long enough for Delver Seekers to finish it off. But you made the good point, which is the traditional bug decks that we've seen years ago relied on Hymn to Tourach and Tombstalker to kind of seal the deal in the game. Now, I think we'll get to Tombstalker towards the end of this episode when we're talking about kind of extra spiciness to add to it.
Yeah. So I think in this deck, because you're not Rug Delver is all about just getting in there. You have 18 lands, don't worry about it. I think in this deck you actually want a few more lands. I think you want to be playing 19 or 20. I think that's really up to preference, and if you have a lot of experience with the deck, I think that's the number you want to be. You want to be a little bit more okay with, like, say, throwing away your lands or being wastelanded. You want to stay... You don't want to get wastelanded out of the game as this deck. Rug Delver...
Well, I think fundamentally when we're comparing Bug Delver to Rug Delver, we're looking at a deck on the Bug Delver side that has a higher mana curve. So we're playing spells like Abrupt Decay and potentially Liliana or Hymn to Tourach, and essentially proactive spells as opposed to reactive spells. If we look at the Rug Delver deck, the highest casting cost spell is Tarmogoyf at 2 mana, and there's only 4 of those.
Yeah.
Bug Delver has many more plays at 2 and higher mana costs, and you are going to need your mana from your lands to be able to do that. Deathrite Shaman helps out, certainly. It provides a nice bridge, but you're still going to need the permanent mana sources with your lands.
Yeah.
So 19, I'd say 19 at minimum, unless you design a deck that's so mana efficient that you can get away with 18.
Yeah, I actually would prefer 20, because I always like to play like the extra land. That's just me, but don't worry about it. Okay, So then moving on to Disruption, I actually...
Well, so are we done with mana, or are we adding, for instance, Wasteland?
Oh, you should... Okay, well, I mean, let's take 2 minutes and just kind of discuss the rest of it. The actual mana ratios should be done just using statistics, just to figure out how many Bayous versus Trops versus Underground Seas. Fine, but you should play 4 Wastelands. I don't see a reason not to play 4 Wastelands.
So we're playing maybe 6 dual lands. Is there any room for basics in this deck? Do we need basics, or do we want basics?
No. So no, we don't need basics, and no, we don't want to play basics. You're trying to be as efficient as possible. You are the aggressor in all of these matchups, or in very many matchups. So I wouldn't worry about trying to fetch out basics to try and get around the Blood Moon. I would just say try to counter the Blood Moon, because that's what kind of deck you are.
Or anticipate it and have Abrupt Decay at the
Exactly.
ready.
So
Right.
Not much to talk about there, except that you're the aggressor. I think if you're going to want to play basics because you're scared of Blood Moon, or there's a lot of Blood Moon in your meta, this perhaps... I think the matchup is still not that bad. I think you might think on paper, like, oh, it's probably 75 in favor of Blood Moon dot deck, but it's not. It's more like 50. So I wouldn't worry too much. But if you were wanting to play basics, there's a whole variety of bug mid-range decks that you can play that do play basics.
Okay. Now, because we're playing Brainstorm and Ponder, and potentially even Sylvan Library, how many fetch lands do we want to include in this deck?
Well, I think in a deck like this, you probably want to run minimum 8, because you have so many shuffle effects. We know that Miracles runs 10, generally, because they have top. So somewhere between 8 and 10 is probably the sweet spot. I'm looking at a deck right now from GPT Kyoto, HappyMTG.com's result from January 31st. This is a post-cruise result, and this person is running 1 Bayou, 2 Misty, 3 Trop, 3 Sea, 3 Verdant Catacombs, and 4 Delta. So if we count that, that is 7 and 9. So 3, 4, and 2.
9 fetch lands.
9 fetch lands. So for me, I would adjust these ratios a little bit. I wouldn't be playing as many Trops. Mind you, this person's running Cleek and Turn Nemesis. So if I were changing it in my build, I'd probably run 2 Bayou, a Trop, 4 Sea. But again, that's just me.
No, it looks good. I'm looking at the list now, and wow, it's actually starting to shape up very similar to how we're putting together this deck, at least on the spell side.
Yeah.
So seems like we're on the right track. This deck got 5th place in about a 50-man tournament in Japan. So
yeah. So I think now we need to move on to the non-stack interaction Disruption.
Right. So quick recap: we got 21 spells between Brainstorm, Ponder, Force of Will, Daze, Spell Pierce, and Abrupt Decay. We have about 12 to 13 creatures with Tarmogoyf, Deathrite Shaman, Delver of Secrets, and potentially a Tasigur or two. So that brings us up to about 34 cards. And if we're playing 19 to 20 lands, we've got about 7 slots.
Yeah, give or take. So I think the first thing that I want to include in our this is our, not only our disruption, but our gravy section, is Sylvan Library. Now, you may consider that, if you've listened to the cast before, I'm very up on Sylvan Library. I own a lot of them, play them in any deck I can. Sometimes Delver decks will run out of tempo, and the reason why Treasure Cruise was so good is because you could easily refill when you had run out of tempo. The mid-range decks would grind you out, and you would lose. But with Treasure Cruise, you came back, and it was fine. You got to draw 3 cards, you were back in the game. Sylvan Library serves a similar role in this deck, because sometimes you will ponder into nothing. You will brainstorm into nothing. You will run out of gas, and sometimes you will need a full grip of cards, or just more cards, to kind of get back into the game. Sylvan Library allows you to do this, and if not, it just allows you card selection. Even if it's not actual card advantage, by drawing more cards, you are filtering a lot more. And you do have fetch lands, you will see a lot more cards than your opponent. So it's like a free top on every upkeep, at the very minimum. I would say don't leave home without it in this deck, even just as a one-of. It's really good against Miracles, it's good against your mid-range decks, even against Delver Mirrors, being able to find your stuff over them, that's where you want to be.
Okay, so let's add one of those to the deck. We'll kind of earmark one. We did mention about disruption between Thoughtseize and Hymn to Tourach.
Yeah.
What do you think is a good ratio there?
Yeah, so I think there's some...
Or even Liliana, if we're talking about kind of multi-angled disruption.
Yeah, so I think there's a few different ways to approach it. There's the Stifle build, which we've seen be popular in the Treasure Cruise meta. We know that Hymn to Tourach has been quite popular in the past, and there's also Thoughtseize. So I'm a proponent of Hymn to Tourach, and I know Bob Huang is a proponent of Hymn to Tourach as well. And
it's good solid card advantage.
Exactly, and that's what you want to be doing in this deck. You want to be doing, say you want to Hymn to Tourach them, then you counter their next threat, and they can be out of the game. 2 cards is a lot for one, and you're casting it, because usually what will happen is you can cast it on turn 2, assuming you don't miss a land drop or need to Wasteland, or what you do is you Hymn to Tourach off a Deathrite Shaman, and then you Wasteland them.
Oh, for the double whammy. I like
so it's a really, really powerful card that took such a beating with the Treasure Cruise metagame. So I think... Not only am I biased in that the card is good, I want to be playing this card again, just because of the fact that I haven't been able to for the last couple of months. I think it's really good. I think Thoughtseize is also quite good. I think there's a lot to say about playing Thoughtseize over Hymn to Tourach, because you get that selection. Sometimes you do want to grab top on turn 1 from the Miracles player, or you want to...
Or for instance, you only care about that one card, like you said, top, or the Stoneforge Mystic, or the ability even to just nab that Batterskull, GT, Sword of Fire and Ice, after they search up.
Exactly. I agree that it's a very powerful thing to do. However, I think generally Hymn to Tourach will be better most of the time.
Okay. So how do you feel about 3 Hymn to Tourach?
I like 3.
Okay. How would we supplement that with Thoughtseize in the deck?
You could play 1 Thoughtseize. You could go... I think I would want to play 5 pieces. Maybe I'm wrong. But I think...
Maybe between the sideboard as well?
No, I think between the sideboard you might want even more. So you could have, say, you could run 3 Hymn, 2 Thoughtseize. You could run 4 Hymn, 1 Thoughtseize as some sort of, balance. It's really up to... I think it's really up to your personal preference and your experience with the deck. I would run 3...
Well, what if, for instance, we went 1 Thoughtseizes and 1 Liliana?
Liliana's interesting as well. So what's the reason of Liliana in this deck? So...
I'm thinking, so I'm looking at this list and I'm seeing there's only really 4 pieces of removal, which is kind of low and it's already kind of taxing. You have to have 2 mana, red, green, black. It's kind of an expensive spell. Yeah, you don't have to worry about counter spells for it, but it only is going to hit, let's say, small creatures. What if, for instance, your opponent has Tasigur, or drops in a show and tell, or plays a Thrun the Last Troll? Just kind of throwing some examples here. I think it's also really good against combo decks. Just being able to go +1 and kind of squeeze your opponent's hand reserve to be able to essentially force them into a play that is not optimal or non-winning.
Yeah, or even just like opposing turn in MSI, right? I mean, that card is still...
Oh, yeah, of course, that card.
It's still coming back.
How could I forget? How could I forget?
I do like Sylvan Library, and the reason it is in this deck is for, like you said, the fatty creatures that you either can't remove. It's an extra piece of removal.
You mean Liliana?
Liliana, yes. Did I say?
You said Sylvan Library. A Freudian slip there. You were thinking of your first
Yeah,
love.
that's true. Liliana does a lot of work in this deck. Some people really don't like running her. I think she's fine as a 1/2 of.
So I think one of the arguments against Liliana is that this deck doesn't really have a way to take advantage of Liliana's kind of grinding approach, which is everyone discard, everyone gets rid of resources. And I think that's a valid complaint, considering this deck really only relies on cantrips to get to the good stuff.
But it could be enough in certain matchups to push them over the edge if you're hurting yourself a little bit and you're still okay, and you're just really punishing your opponent on cards. They won't be able to get back into the game at times. Now, I've definitely seen lists without Liliana, so I wouldn't worry if your play experience your mileage on Liliana has not been as good.
Okay.
I think
so. That brings us kind of up to 5 or 6 spicy slots.
Yeah, so I think that if you're not going to run Liliana, you just run another Hymn to Tourach / piece of removal.
Okay.
So right now,
how about let's talk about maybe a potential 5th piece of removal if we're not playing Liliana. What do you think about Maelstrom Pulse?
I think Maelstrom Pulse is fine. It's 3 mana, so it's a little bit higher on the curve, but it does get rid of everything and tokens and whatever. I think Murderous Cut is also an interesting piece of creature removal. It's the Delve removal. Kobe, you should know this. Have you not seen Murderous Cut?
I think I saw it in my sealed deck.
So
it's like a Doomblade, right?
So what it is it's 4 in black, Delve, instant, destroy target creature.
Oh, that seems fine. I mean, it has a lot of diminishing returns, but playing 1 of seems more than legitimate.
Yeah, I think it's perfectly fine. I like that as a piece of removal in this deck. It's a 1 mana, kill any creature on the board, Tasigur or not. Tombstalker.
What about Disfigure if we're really focusing on efficiency and recognizing that most of Legacy's creature base is 2 mana, less than 2.
Sure, and tokens. I think that's also a consideration. Disfigure is totally fine. You could even say Dark Blast is fine, because it is a recurring piece of removal. Now, the Dark Blast will be not quite as good in a non-cruise meta, because filling up your graveyard before was really, really good, and now it's just fine. So,
I think we have the deck.
I think we do. So I think we have something like 4 Tarmogoyf, 4 Deathrite Shaman, 4 Delver Secrets, 1/2 Tasigur. Then we have 4 Brainstorm, 4 Force of Will, 4 Ponder, 4 Abrupt Decay, 3 Daze, 2 Spell Pierce, 3 Hymn to Tourach, 1 Thoughtseize, 1 Sylvan Library, 1 Liliana, 20 lands, give or take.
Mm-hmm. And I think that the last few slots are really up to me or the listener to kind of figure out or even just play around with and put in 10, 20, 30 games with the deck against your friends or online on Magic Workstation, whatever is popular and free, to figure out which you want to fill up with the last slot. There's a lot of options. We talked about some pieces of removal. You could even bump up Daze up to 4. If you want it to be really spicy, you could put a Jace Balerin. But I think maybe Vendilion Click might just be better there.
Yeah. So, I mean, I want to generally talk about the Bug sideboard as well. I don't want to go too deep into it because there are so many options, and I think Bug is actually in a really good place in the color scheme to kind of handle a lot of the different other decks in the format.
Okay, so this is going to come fast and quick, and we're not going to provide a lot of explanation. So, Matt, let's go back and forth and just kind of name some sideboard cards that have seen popular play and or are good options.
So again, before I start, I'm just going to quickly recap the decks that you might be looking at seeing. Stoneblade, Miracles, Maverick, Death and Taxes, Blue-Red Delver, Patriot Delver, any other flavor of Delver, Shardless Bug.
Probably a good... also Burn. You may see
Burn.
You'll definitely see.
And Storm Combo, Show and Tell, etc. So, going over cards. Grafdigger's Cage.
Golgari Charm.
Pithing Needle.
Disfigure, additional copies in the sideboard.
Engineered Plague.
Engineered Explosive.
Flusterstorm.
Surgical Extraction.
Crossing Grip.
Life from the Loam.
Vendilion Clique.
Jace the Mind Sculptor.
Maelstrom Pulse.
Matt, I'm kind of running
Nope,
out of
I
here.
haven't run out yet.
Duress.
Yep, Duress, Thoughtseize.
I would actually shy away from Inquisition unless it's a budget choice for Thoughtseize.
I agree. Chill.
But it is an option. Ooh, Chill's a good one. Chill's a really good one.
It covers a kind of matchup that's really not good for you, and it's good against the other Delver decks that run a lot of red.
Marsh Casualties.
Ooh, that's nice. I like that.
Yeah, that was in the winning Legacy Open deck from Indianapolis in Jim Davis' sideboard.
Speaking of Jim Davis, you could also run Dark Confidants in this deck, but that's kind of a different flavor and kind of a whole different discussion. But Card Advantage Engine, that's a one. That exists.
You could put in Baleful Strix, but usually has low
impact. I don't like it.
Low impact, yeah. Umezawa's Jite, though, is a good
that's
choice
a good sideboard
against
card.
a lot of creature decks.
You
also good against Burn, if you're ever managed to connect with it.
Dread of Night.
Ooh, good one. Cursed Totem.
Ooh, very nice.
You do take a hit on Deathrite Shaman, but it's very good against Death and Taxes as well as Elves.
Carpet of Flowers.
That one seems a little dubious.
In the mirror.
Still seems a little dubious.
I like it.
Okay. I think I would prefer not to touch that card in this kind of deck. Just because all it provides is mana, and you generally want to be playing high-impact cards, not mana cards.
Fair enough.
That said, I think Liliana in the sideboard is also another good choice.
Agreed. You could be playing it. What else could you run? There are so many different cards that do cover a lot of the matchups that you may be concerned with. So if I were running this,
let's see. Oh, Nullrod.
Oh,
Nullrod is a really
Nullrod's very spice. I like Nullrod.
Toxic Deluge against any creature.
Yeah,
matchup.
I would still run Golgari Charm. I think for the reason being it's a little bit cheaper. It hits enchantments. You got some other play, and a lot of the time, do you need to kill anything that's 2? Maybe not. Maybe that's me. Maybe I'm wrong, but
I think the Nullrod's a pretty spicy.
Oh, I definitely like Nullrod. I'm just actually.
It's. I think it's actually Nullrod might be a better one than Curse Totem.
Yeah, I like Curse Totem in. I like Curse Totem in Rug Delver because you don't have what you're trying to do is you're trying to pressure them, and against the decks that have mana producers, you want to be hitting their lands and then Curse Toteming them so they can't kind of use those resources to kind of get out of the hole that they're in. So you could also play True Name Nemesis in the sideboard.
Interesting. I think it falls in the same camp as Baleful Strix.
It does,
which is low impact,
but it's still an option. Another card, more Spell Pierces. You could run another Sylvan Library.
Oh, I like that. I like the second Sylvan Library, but you and I both have stated that we really enjoy the card, and it does a lot of good work in specific matchups. It's a little bit narrow, and you generally only want to bring it in where you can afford the life total, to pay the life totals. But when you do and when you get it, it's going to be a big impact.
Yeah, and I think if you're playing
Submerge.
Bob, you don't need Sylvan Library.
Correct. Submerge is a one that I found here.
Oh,
Seems,
I haven't seen Submerge in a
really
while.
Right. I think we're finally getting back to a point where green is coming back.
May I use the phrase green is
decks.
good?
Greed is good. And green is usually greedy.
Ooh, hold on. I've got a spicy one. Hold on. Wait for it. Winter Orb.
Ooh, I remember this card. I remember this card suggesting it to my friend who used to play Bug Delver all the time. So, good choice, especially against Miracles.
I don't like Choke, obviously, because of the collateral damage and the mana cost, even if it was opponents. But, like, Winter Orb is a nice 2 mana. It comes down. People don't expect it, and it's very hard to play around. Again, you're holding their mana back, and they're trying to, like, creep back up to kind of, like, get back in the game, and you just, like, land Tarmogoyf and go all the way.
Here's a fun one. Legacy's Allure.
Really?
Yeah.
Do tell us.
Well, okay, so it's essentially those uninitiated, it's a blue enchantment, costs blue. During your upkeep, you can put a charge counter on it, and at any time you can sacrifice it to gain control of a creature with power less than or equal to the number of charge counters on Legacy's Allure. So the idea is you want to play some sort of steel creature, and it doesn't attach, so it's permanent until the creature leaves the battlefield. might be a good way to steal, let's say, a Deathrite Shaman, or Stoneforge Mystic, or Dark Confidant. Maybe it's a dubious one. Again, we're kind of stretching here at the last few for the sideboard cards for bug tempo.
There's a lot of different options, though. I would say pack a few Krosan Grips for the Stoneblade decks and for Miracles. Pack a little bit of extra removal for the smaller creature decks. And pack something to hit against the mid-range decks, so something that's going to pressure their mana base. I think if you can cover those and a little bit of extra graveyard hate / counter spells for like combo, should be good to go.
Yeah, and I think this deck has a lot going for it with the diversity you can include in a sideboard, and how you can attune the main deck or swap cards in from the main to the side for game one configurations that provide a lot of value and a lot of play, and also leaves your opponent scratching their head, wondering, well, what else are they playing? You show them one weird card in the main deck, and you'll really confuse a lot of players that are knowledgeable.
Yep. So I think this would be a good choice coming up for any sort of tournaments. Just make sure you're tuning your deck, getting a lot of practice in, and if you like some weird choices, kind of like think about what matchups you're playing against, and it is sometimes okay to bring something in from the sideboard into the main deck. Don't be afraid.
If you do pick up this deck, tell us how your experience went, how the cards worked out, and what cool prizes you won with it.
Yeah. Now, I just want to go over the matchups between this deck and the other top decks and kind of how we feel as to how favorable or not they are. Now, I have played Bug Delver. No, I don't have infinite experience with the deck. I did play it for a few months back maybe a year or two ago, kind of off and on, just to keep up to date on the metagame and to learn my enemy and what have you. Nobody plays this deck, actually, in my current metagame, at least not in Legacy. There's a vintage version of Bug that does happen, but they're not quite the same. So, again, recapping the other top decks in the format being Blades, Delver, Elves, what have you. Let's start with Miracles. So,
okay,
I
would say,
what do you think?
Yeah, I would say against Miracles, the Bug tempo deck is even to slightly unfavored.
Now, pre-board or post-board?
Pre-board. You're right. We do need to consider the entire match, not just game one statistics. I'd say it's about even to slightly favorable overall. Reasons being is you have Abrupt Decay. You're a tempo deck with Daze and Spell Pierce and Force of Wills. So as long as you focus on disabling the right cards at the right time, you should be able to ride that tempo wave to victory.
So, again, what is the key to winning the Miracles matchup? Since the Divine Top is a very powerful card, and if you can cause them to discard it or daze it, sometimes it is even good to Force of Will that card on turn one. I'm not saying every time, but depending, that can be truly relevant. So, in this match,
the key cards to counter is really Terminus and Entreat the Angels.
Yeah, those are and I mean Jace, I guess, depending on your board position, but generally, yeah, the Miracle cards are going to get you Counterbalance. If it resolves and is there unmolested, will wreak havoc on your game plan. You run 1s and 2s and some 3s. So I would try to pressure very hard here.
What cards would you take out in this matchup for game 2 and 3?
All right, well, looking at our list, so what would I pull out? Well, we know that if we're running the extra removal, that's no good. So if we're running Disfigures, probably not as good. Daze, here there's an argument here for Daze. No, well,
I think Daze. I think in a tempo deck, Daze is a card you almost never want on the draw, but almost always want on the play. So I think regardless of what matchup you're in, that's a consideration that's just overarching.
Yeah. Now you could also argue that you could leave one Daze in, so that if your opponent sees it, they're kind of playing around it, but you don't have enough copies to actually do anything. So them playing around the Daze is almost as good as the Daze being there itself, right?
Right, and I think seeing it in the main deck is more than enough reason to for your opponent to play around in game 2 and 3 anyway.
So how many slots do we assume that we're bringing in against a Miracles deck? We'll say 4, maybe?
I'd say between 3 to 4. You don't want to overdo it because you change the structure of a deck fundamentally beyond that. I think cards that would be really good to bring in here are Krosan Grips, Golgari Charm, Null Rod if you run it, extra disruption, hand disruption, so for instance Thoughtseize or Liliana or Jace, or Sylvan Libraries. Ways to essentially recoup your card advantage and disrupt the opponent just long enough for your creatures to complete the job.
All right, so tactical question for you. You're playing against Miracles.
Mm-hmm.
You're on the play. You've gone turn one. Sorry, let's phrase this so it's a little bit maybe more awkward. You're on the draw. You go turn one Delver.
Okay.
They swords at end of turn. They go back to their turn two. They have a plains and a fetch land. No, they have a plains and a fetch land.
Okay.
They pass back to you. You have Underground Sea Bayou. Do you play Hymn to Tourach? Do you play Sylvan Library?
So they have about 5 cards in their hand.
Yeah, let's say that. And let's say they didn't mulligan into Oblivion. They have about the same. So what cards are?
And we're assuming that we don't have Daze.
Yes.
Which would not also be relevant if they do play the second island and then go counterbalance. Without knowing any other information in my hand,
We know that they have a fetch land.
No, if we only know 2 of the cards in our hand, which is Hymn to Tourach or what was the other one? Sylvan.
Or I mean, we can even say, and there's a Tarmogoyf, but I'm saying
I would not play the Tarmogoyf.
Yeah, that's my point. So are you slamming a Sylvan, or are you slamming the Hymn to Tourach?
I would probably be more inclined to play Hymn to Tourach because Sylvan Library is a card that lets you recoup card advantage. If you play it early, you'll get the filtering, but considering the circumstance in the game, which is turn 2, your opponent has played a land and passed with 5 cards in their hand. Maybe they have 2 extra lands in their hand out of 5 card. Maybe they're building up to our Jace. Maybe they're just waiting for that second island in play so that they can play counterbalance. Hymn to Tourach is a card they definitely want to avoid getting hit by. So I would probably play Hymn to Tourach in this scenario.
Yep. Now, I mean, some of you could argue that maybe you bring out Hymn to Tourach in this matchup, but I just want to kind of go over. I agree. I would actually go with Hymn to Tourach here because it's possible that you hit either maybe their mana sources or the bomb that they're keeping. Maybe they brainstorm in response, but then they've already used up that fetch land and they're kind of
drawing the same cards over again.
So I think kind of no matter which way you cut it, I think you really want to play Hymn to Tourach. I think there is a situation where you do want to play Sylvan, and that's like depending on how many cards they have in their hand. Or if they
let's
have
say if you have an Abrupt Decay.
I think if they have...
Or, for instance, if you have an Abrupt Decay, you'd probably want to play the Sylvan Library, and then you can deal with the counterbalance later.
Yeah.
Good scenario.
All right.
Let's focus on something that maybe would be a little bit trickier. Suppose we're playing against Elves.
Which, from what I've heard, is not the greatest matchup.
Yeah, so the Elves matchup is going to be very unfavorable for the Bug player in pre-board, and possibly doesn't get much better, so maybe slightly unfavorable based on the creature removal the Bug Delver deck has in the sideboard. So, for instance, Toxic Deluge, Golgari Charm, Engineered Plague, Engineered Explosives, what have you.
Yeah. So what's the situation?
So suppose you are in game 2, so your opponent already knows what you're playing, and you do have options for sideboard cards, but let's say you somehow squeaked out game 1. So your opponent leads with Deathrite Shaman off of Fetch Land and Forest. In your hand, you have a Thoughtseize, a Disfigure, and a Deathrite Shaman. Which is your play and why?
Okay, so I know that Julian knows the answer to this. So I actually want to ask him on the next cast. But I'll give my reasoning for why you would do either of them.
Alright, so we'll make a note to ask Julian this specific question next time on our podcast. But let's hear yours, Matt.
Deathrite Shaman is not the worst card in the world out of that deck, so I don't think I'd want to kill it on the spot. There are certain creatures that you want to disfigure that I think either produce mana or you might want to save it for later. Those being like Nettle Sentinel, Heritage Druid.
So Disfigure is not the card you want?
I don't think so. Unless I have a read that they have a lot of... They're mana screwed or something like that. I think playing my own Deathrite here leads to a situation of dueling Deathrites, which is always a little bit awkward, and they're already ahead. So I only get to catch up like 2 turns from now, in which case we're warring over mana, and they have more mana than I do. So
they'll always have more mana. It's an elf.
So I don't think I want to play Deathrite here either. I think I want a Thoughtseize. Why do I want a Thoughtseize? Here's the reason. There's no kind of crazy thing that they can do right now where they bounce something and dodge a removal. There's no... I can catch them with their pants down. This deck can go off on turn 3, I think is the earliest. Maybe turn 2 is like the
turn 2
is the nut draw. I want to avoid that. You have no out to natural order except a force of will. So I think what we want to do here is we want to do the natural order check. We can determine what they have in their hand. We can get information. From there, we can decide, do we want to play Disfigure next turn? Do we want to play a Tarmogoyf? What do we want to do next turn? And I think being able to take, say, their natural order or Glimpse of Nature and putting them into creature deck mode makes that deck a lot worse, and therefore gives you a better chance to actually win.
Right. So in this matchup, you want to push for the late game. That's when all the Bug Tempo's removal starts to become much better and active. So, for instance, Engineered Explosive, Engineered Plague, Toxic Deluge, Marsh Casualties, Golgari Charm.
Now, they can also grind us out. I'm not saying that they can't. It's just that I think right here, you want them to not nut draw you with Craterhoof Behemoth because you have no game plan against that.
Right. So I think the worst possible play to see from an Elf player when you're playing Bug is a Glimpse Chain. It doesn't even have to be a full-on combo out. It's even if they draw 2 or 3 cards off of it, you're already looking in a bad situation. So your opponent, the Elf opponent, has a full grip of cards, and you still have to deal with the creatures one by one.
Yeah.
I would actually, if in this scenario, I would go with Deathrite Shaman to try to catch up on mana, so I can open up the big mana plays faster on our side.
That's. I mean, it's fair. I think Deathrite Shaman is not a bad play. I just think you get into... It might be a little bit awkward because it might not be as good of a mana producer as you might think it'll be.
Right. It totally depends on what the rest of the hand is composed of. If, for instance, you do have that big mana play, which is really 3 mana or 2 chains spelled together in the same turn, that's really where you want to focus on the Deathrite Shaman. Thoughtseize, I think, if you have, let's say, a Daze or a Force Will or Spell Pierce at the ready, Thoughtseize seems like a better turn 2 play. But again, that depends on the strength of your hand going into your first turn.
I totally agree.
Do you want to do one more scenario, Matt?
Yeah.
Or, I think... Okay.
So you're playing against Stoneblade.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. So Stoneblade, from what I remember, can be good and bad, which means that's actually not a meaningful statement. I'm sorry. It really depends on how the plays go. If they get equipment, their creatures become better than yours, which is really awkward, and you don't like that. Tarmogoyf is generally a big dude, but sometimes these deck pack Feast and Famine, and that's a really good card against us. So
I think True Name Nemesis is even a good card against Tarmogoyf.
Yeah, and True Name is quite good as well.
I would even say that if they're running Snapcaster Mage...
Oh, don't even get me... Snapcaster real good.
Yeah, if the Stoneblade deck is running Snapcaster Mage in decent amounts, so about, I think, 2 to 3... then I think Bug Tempo is not very favored. I think a priority with the Deathrite Shamans is to eliminate all the removal from their graveyard as soon as possible.
Yes.
Part of the reason is when Snapcaster Mage brings back removal, Bug Tempo is not in a good spot.
Yeah, it's kind of an awkward situation. I'm trying to construct a scenario that's kind of got some play to it. I mean, there's ones that are more obvious, like you have the opportunity to Sylvan Library or Abrupt Decay an untapped Stoneforge Mystic. What do? Well, you Abrupt Decay the untapped Stoneforge Mystic so they don't drop Batterskull on your head. And...
Right. I think maybe the big factors in this matchup is timing. So, for instance, if the opponent, unfortunately, let's say, has only 1 mana untapped and a fetch land, and you kind of, with a Stoneforge Mystic in play, and you sense that they're going to go fetch for a land and drop a Batterskull or whatever.
Obviously, in response, that's when you would time your removal when they've got the fetch land cracked, not enough mana to do anything, nuke their Stoneforge Mystic.
Correct.
I think in this matchup...
That's a relatively easy one to spot and a good one to keep in the back of your mind. I don't think that's going to happen too much in practice.
No, I don't think so either. I think there are... Well, let's see another situation. Like, if you have a Thoughtseize or an Abrupt Decay, and they have a Stoneforge Mystic that just played in search for Batterskull, what do? Do you Thoughtseize away the Batterskull, or do you kill the... Again, that's actually a really bad question, because you would just always Thoughtseize the Batterskull. Why would you not? I'm trying to think of, like, interesting scenarios, but...
I think, and in this matchup in sideboard games, the Disfigure is going to be a big factor. I mean, some of the plays might actually be just, like, Abrupt Decay the token, and wait, your opponent may not have 5 mana for a while. to redeploy the Batterskull.
Agreed. I mean, Abrupt Decaying the Batterskull token has won me more games than I care to admit. Or even swinging in and doing it mid-combat, so they're kind of, it's a little bit trickier. They
lose the blocker, they lose the lifelinker, all that good stuff.
Yeah, just how they kind of...
I think in this matchup, Hymn to Tourach is going to be a good source of card advantage.
You know what? I actually don't like it as much. Really? Yeah, and I'll tell you why. Because there are times, on turn 2, when do I want to play it? Because generally what I found is, turn 2 Stoneforge Mystic is extremely common. So, if they're dropping turn 2 Stoneforge Mystic, do I want to Hymn to Tourach on the draw here? No, that seems terrible. I want to get rid of that Stoneforge Mystic. I want to have removal. If you're on the play, sure, Hymn to Tourach is fine. Because they're on turn 1.
Let me paint the scenario then. Suppose you do have a Hymn to Tourach in your hand against such an opponent. Would you, for instance, put it back into your deck with Brainstorm to get rid of it? Do you dislike it that much?
It's hard to say. It's hard to say. I want to know what else is going on. You want the card advantage because getting rid of their value creatures, like a Stoneforge Mystic, or getting rid of a Snapcaster Mage, or a Counterspell, those are all good things to get rid of. I think on the play, yeah, if they're fetch line pass and you're Hymn to Tourach you, well, yeah, that's good. That's quite good. But on the draw, say you're sitting there. I think the only time when that would be good is if you are boarding in a bunch of disfigures, because then you can go end of turn, disfigure your Stoneforge Mystic, untap, land, Hymn to Tourach you. That's okay. I think in that matchup, I agree that the mini removal, the 1-mana removal, is so important.
Okay. Yeah, this is certainly a tricky matchup, and I would pin it at unfavorable to slightly unfavorable, depending on composition.
That's all I have to say. Just play 1 to 2 of those cards, because it'll work miracles. Is that gonna?
Would you bring in a Null Rod in this matchup if you had access?
Yes, I would, for a few reasons. Some of these Blade decks are more controlly, and they will therefore be playing Engineered Explosives or Top. For all the equipment, the other equipment, say Jite or Sword of Fire and Ice or Feast and Famine or whatever, or even just bouncing Batterskull, Null Rod is quite good. And it's only a 1 of, so you're not really hurting yourself by bringing in 1 of it. And if you see it...
If you had a choice between a Pithing Needle and a Null Rod, which would you bring in?
Pithing Needle, I mean, you maybe are afraid of Jace. Maybe. But you're hoping that if your game plan goes correctly, they either never cast Jace, or Jace is so unfavorable that they don't want to be casting it. Maybe that's my reasoning here. Null Rod, I think, hits a lot more cards in their deck and a lot more problem cards that you don't want to have to worry about.
Right. I was just thinking maybe put a Pithing Needle down on Stoneforge Mystic.
Yeah, I mean,
don't have to worry about all these different scenarios and just go to town with Tarmogoyf and Delver of Secrets and.
Sure, but if they naturally draw the equipment, say Jite's in their hand already. Then they go, cool, cast Jite, equip.
But see, if they're casting the Jite, that is opening it up to counter.
Of course.
Force of Wills, Spell
But the thing is,
maybe even Daze.
Sure, but the question is, am I assuming that I have Force of Will for Jite? Or because, I would want to say Force of Will for, True Name Nemesis. Because that thing is...
Right. Now, here's a big question, too. Would you keep the Force of Wills in the deck against this matchup?
Yeah, well... Again, as someone who does not play this deck enough, that's a very hard decision for me to say. I know generally if you're playing against a mid-range mirrory type thing where individual cards don't matter as much, where it's just oh, well, what am I going to Force of Will? Everything? Or they have a lot of hand disruption, you don't want Force of Will. But I know that I think there are situations where you do want to Force of Will things in this deck. So do you shave numbers? What do you do? That I'm skeptical on.
Right. Well, I think that might be a homework assignment, and I'll have to get back with what I found out.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting. I think overall, I still think the deck is well positioned and has a lot of good sideboard options for a lot of the different matchups that are currently for the decks that are doing well in the new metagame. Questions, comments, and observations are always appreciated. You can reach us on Facebook at facebook.com/EverydayEternalPodcast, on Twitter at EternalMTG, and on the comment section of our website, or on MTG The Source. Jacob is MTG Kobe on Twitter, and I'm ST_Matt on Twitter. Today's music has been Something Elated by Broke for Free, and was acquired through the Free Music Archive. Check out Broke for Free at brokeforfree.com.